She was paid to watch over a dangerous billionaire, but when she saw him, she knew she had to set him free. A young nurse steps into a frozen mountain mansion, expecting to care for a violent man everyone says is out of control, but the moment she looks into his eyes, she realizes something is terribly wrong. He's not dangerous, he's terrified, and every hallway whispers the same secret. Someone wants him trapped, someone wants her silent, and the people paying her might be the ones pulling the strings. She was hired to keep him contained. But what if the real threat is the family watching her every move? If she tries to save him, can she survive what comes next? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The late afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Vivian Kane's modest kitchen as she stirred a pot of her mother's favorite vegetable soup. Her shoulders ached from a 12-hour shift at Peaceful Meadows Assisted Living, but she couldn't rest yet. The familiar scent of herbs and simmering broth filled the small space, mingling with the worry that seemed to constantly hover in her mind these days. "Mama, the soup's almost ready," she called out, her voice carrying down the short hallway to where her mother, Lillian, was helping her father, James, settle into his favorite armchair. "Coming, baby," Lillian replied, her footsteps slow but steady on the worn carpet. Vivian ladled the steaming soup into 3 bowls, arranging them carefully on the kitchen table alongside some fresh cornbread. Her father's arthritis had been acting up more than usual lately, making it difficult for him to hold utensils steady. The extra-wide spoons she'd bought last month had helped, but watching him struggle still broke her heart. As her parents made their way to the table, Vivian noticed how her mother's limp seemed more pronounced today. The doctor had recommended knee replacement surgery months ago, but they all knew that was impossible with their current financial situation. "This smells just like my mama used to make," Lillian said, easing into her chair with a grateful sigh. "You always remember the little details, baby." James nodded in agreement, his weathered hands carefully wrapping around the warm bowl. "Our girl's got healing in her hands, just like your mama did, Lil." Vivian smiled, but her heart clenched as she watched her father's hands tremble slightly. The stack of medical bills in her desk drawer seemed to grow thicker every month, and her salary at Peaceful Meadows barely covered the basics. She'd been picking up extra shifts whenever possible, but it never seemed to be enough. "How was work today?" her mother asked, blowing gently on a spoonful of soup. "Same as usual," Vivian replied, breaking off a piece of cornbread. "Mrs. Henderson finally agreed to take her blood pressure medication, and Mr. Patterson told everyone he used to be a circus acrobat again." Her parents chuckled, but Vivian could see the concern in their eyes. They knew how hard she worked, how much she worried about them. "Baby, you're working too hard," Lillian said softly. "We're managing just fine." "Mama, please," Vivian said, reaching across the table to squeeze her mother's hand. "Let me help. You and Daddy took care of me my whole life. It's my turn now." James cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "We're blessed to have you, baby girl, but your mama's right. We don't want you wearing yourself out over us." The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a typical Atlanta autumn day. Vivian helped her parents into her reliable old Honda, checking twice to make sure they both had their seat belts properly fastened before pulling out of the driveway. The drive to their doctor's appointment was quiet, filled with the soft gospel music playing on the radio and her mother's occasional humming. Vivian's mind wandered to the bills waiting at home, calculating and recalculating how she could possibly make everything work. After dropping her parents off at the medical center, Vivian's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She normally let such calls go to voicemail, but something made her answer this time. "Hello, is this Vivian Kane?" A crisp, professional voice asked. "Yes, this is she. Ms. Kane, I'm calling from Elite Medical Staffing. We have an unusual but potentially very lucrative opportunity that matches your qualifications perfectly." Vivian listened with increasing disbelief as the recruiter outlined the position: a private nursing contract for Damon Vale, the reclusive billionaire whose family owned half of Atlanta's skyline. The salary mentioned made her breath catch. It was more money than she'd make in 5 years at Peaceful Meadows. The position does come with some unique challenges. The recruiter continued carefully. Mr. Vale is known to experience periods of violent delusions. However, all necessary security measures are in place, and your safety would be our top priority. Vivian's first instinct was to decline. It sounded too good to be true, and she'd learned long ago that such things usually were. But then she thought of her mother's knee, her father's trembling hands, and the mounting pile of bills. "I'd be interested in learning more," she heard herself say. "Excellent. Could you come to our offices this afternoon? We're located in the Vale Tower downtown." After confirming the details and ending the call, Vivian sat in her car for a long moment, her heart racing. The money could change everything. Pay off her parents' medical bills, maybe even help some of the families in her church community who were struggling. But something about the situation made her uneasy. She spent the rest of the morning at the medical center with her parents, trying to focus on their appointments while her mind kept drifting to the upcoming meeting. When she finally pulled up to the Vale Tower that afternoon, its gleaming glass exterior seemed to pierce the sky like a silver needle. The marble lobby was immaculate, all clean lines and hushed voices. Her practical nursing shoes squeaked slightly on the polished floor as she approached the security desk, making her feel out of place among the designer suits and clicking heels. "I'm Vivian Kane," she told the security guard. "I have an appointment with elite medical staffing." As she waited for her visitor's badge, Vivian's grandmother's voice echoed in her head. "Trust your gut, baby girl. The Lord gave you those instincts for a reason." Right now, those instincts were sending mixed signals. Excitement about the opportunity to help her family, but also a nagging sense that there was more to this situation than met the eye. The elevator doors opened silently, and Vivian stepped inside, pressing the button for the 42nd floor. As she watched the numbers climb, she said a quick prayer for guidance, for wisdom, and for the strength to make the right decision, whatever that might be. The mirrored walls of the elevator reflected her image back at her, a young black woman in simple scrubs, her hair neatly braided, her posture straight despite her uncertainty. Her mother always said she had her grandmother's eyes, kind but shrewd, missing nothing. She would need that discernment now more than ever. The elevator chimed, and Vivian took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders as the doors opened. Whatever waited for her beyond those doors, she would face it with the grace and strength her parents had taught her, and the wisdom her grandmother had passed down. She stepped forward into the pristine corporate hallway, her heart pounding but her step steady, ready to learn more about this opportunity that could change everything for her family. The 42nd floor was a stark contrast to the warm, homey assisted living facility where Vivian usually worked. The air felt thin and cold, despite the summer heat outside. Glass walls revealed spectacular views of Atlanta's skyline, but there was something sterile about the perfect cleanliness, the absence of any personal touches. A tall woman in an impeccable charcoal suit approached, her heels clicking precisely on the polished floor. "Miss Kane, I'm Margaret Chen, legal counsel for the Vale family." Her handshake was brief and firm. "Please follow me." The conference room they entered could have seated 20 people, but only 2 chairs faced each other across the gleaming mahogany table. Ms. Chen gestured for Vivian to sit, then placed a thick manila envelope between them. "Before we discuss the specifics of the position, you'll need to sign this non-disclosure agreement." She slid the document across the table. Everything we discussed today, and everything you may encounter should you accept the position, must remain strictly confidential. Vivian's fingers traced the edge of the envelope. May I review this? Overnight? Of course. Ms. Chen's smile didn't reach her eyes, but I should warn you, Damon Vale's condition requires particular handling. He can be dangerous, unpredictable. The position demands strict supervision and adherence to established protocols. The way she said it made Vivian's skin prickle. I was told he experiences delusions. Among other things. Ms. Chen's voice was carefully neutral. The compensation package reflects the challenging nature of the assignment. In addition to the base salary we discussed, you'll receive comprehensive health benefits, housing at the facility, and a substantial completion bonus after 6 months. Vivian left the Vale Tower an hour later, her head spinning with numbers and her bag heavy with paperwork. The sun was setting as she drove home, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded her of her grandmother's favorite quilt. That evening, after helping her father with his physical therapy exercises and tucking her mother into bed, Vivian called Pastor Brooks. His warm voice brought immediate comfort, as it had through so many difficult times before. "Pastor, I need your guidance," she said, explaining the situation. "The money would be such a blessing for my family, but something about it feels off." There was a thoughtful pause before he responded. "Vivian, do you remember the story of Esther?" "Yes, Pastor. She was placed in an unexpected position, one that seemed frightening and dangerous, but God had a purpose for her being there. Sometimes, child, we're called to step into uncomfortable situations because someone needs us, someone who has no one else." His words settled deep in her heart. "But how do I know if this is really where God wants me to be?" "Pray about it, Vivian. Listen to that still, small voice inside you. The Lord gave you a caring heart and a sharp mind. Trust those gifts He blessed you with." After they prayed together, Vivian spent several hours reviewing the contract. The terms were generous but rigid, with strict confidentiality clauses and specific protocols for everything from daily routines to emergency situations. By the time she called Ms. Chen the next morning to accept the position, the sun was just beginning to rise. Events moved quickly after that. A private car, sleek, black, and eerily quiet, arrived to take her to the airport. The driver loaded her bags without a word, and soon they were heading toward a private airfield she hadn't known existed. The private jet was another first for Vivian. She sat stiffly in the plush leather seat, feeling out of place among such luxury. Through the window she watched Atlanta disappear beneath the clouds, her heart aching already for her parents, her church, her community. Hours later, the plane descended into Colorado's Rocky Mountains. Snow still capped the highest peaks, though it was late spring. The car waiting at the small mountain airport was identical to the one in Atlanta. Black, sleek, anonymous. They drove for nearly 2 hours, climbing higher into the mountains on winding roads that seemed to lead nowhere. Finally, massive iron gates appeared, set into thick stone walls that disappeared into the forest on either side. A guard station stood sentinel, and Vivian glimpsed the glint of security cameras tracking their movement. The gates swung open with a low groan, and the car moved forward into swirling mountain mist. As they closed behind her with a heavy clang, a chill ran down Vivian's spine. Through the thinning fog, an enormous mansion slowly emerged, all grey stone and sharp angles, more fortress than home. Its windows stared down at her like dark, watchful eyes, and Vivian found herself gripping her cross necklace, her grandmother's parting gift years ago. "Lord," she whispered, "if you brought me here, please help me understand why." The car came to a stop at the base of wide stone steps. In the swirling mist, the mansion loomed above her like a mountain itself, beautiful but forbidding. Whatever, or whoever, waited inside, Vivian knew with certainty that her life would never be the same. The heavy wooden doors swung open with barely a whisper, revealing a grand foyer with soaring ceilings and polished marble floors. 2 security guards flanked Vivian as she stepped inside, their faces impassive. Her practical nursing shoes squeaked slightly on the pristine surface, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. "Miss Kane." The voice was refined, cultured, and somehow managed to make her name sound like an afterthought. Elaine Vale descended the sweeping staircase with practiced grace, her silver-streaked dark hair perfectly styled, her cream-colored suit probably worth more than Vivian's car. Despite being in her 50s, she moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Mrs. Vale." Vivian responded, extending her hand. "Thank you for this opportunity." Elaine's handshake was brief and cool. "We'll see if you're truly up to the challenge. My stepson requires special handling." She gestured for Vivian to follow her down a corridor. "The previous nurses found the position too demanding. I trust you reviewed the protocols thoroughly." "Yes, ma'am. Every page." They passed through several security checkpoints, each requiring Elaine's fingerprint and retinal scan. The further they went, the more the mansion's luxury gave way to an almost clinical atmosphere. The warm woods and rich carpets disappeared, replaced by reinforced doors and institutional lighting. "Damon can be unpredictable," Elaine explained, her heels clicking against the now tile floor. "The security measures are for everyone's protection, including his own." She paused before a thick door with a reinforced glass window. "See for yourself." Vivian stepped forward, her heart beating faster. Through the glass, she saw a spacious room, furnished like an upscale apartment, but with subtle differences. Everything bolted, down, no sharp edges, security cameras visible in every corner. At a table near the window sat a man in his late 30s, staring out at the mountain view. Damon Vale's appearance startled her. She'd expected someone wild-eyed and disheveled, but the man before her sat with rigid posture in pressed clothes, his dark hair neatly trimmed. His hands rested motionless on the table, and even from this distance she could see the restraint marks on his wrists. As if sensing their presence, he turned. His eyes met Vivian's through the glass, clear, intelligent eyes that held no trace of madness. Instead, she saw something that made her breath catch. Deep sadness and resignation. "Are you ready to meet him?" Elaine asked, her hand hovering over the security panel. Vivian squared her shoulders. "Yes." The door opened with a pressurized hiss. Damon didn't move as they entered, but his gaze followed them. Up close, Vivian noticed more details. The slight tremor in his hands suggesting heavy medication, the careful way he held himself as if in pain. "Damon, this is Miss Kane, your new nurse," Elaine announced. "I expect you to cooperate with her fully." "Of course, Elaine." His voice was quiet but steady. When he looked at Vivian again, he said softly, "You don't need to be afraid of me." Elaine's smile tightened. "I'll leave you to review his chart and medication schedule. The guards are right outside if you need them." With that, she exited, the door sealing behind her with a definitive click. Vivian approached the table slowly, her trained eye taking in details. Damon's pupils were severely constricted, a sign of significant sedation. The bruises visible beneath his shirt sleeve didn't match the pattern of self-injury she'd seen in other patients, and the heavy restraints seemed excessive for someone so clearly subdued. "The dosages they have you on seem very high," she said carefully, reviewing his chart. "They say it's necessary." His words were measured, deliberate. Like everything else here. Over the next few hours, Vivian went through her nursing duties, checking vital signs and reviewing care protocols. Every movement was watched, by the cameras, by the guards outside, by Elaine, who periodically appeared at the window. The more she observed, the more questions arose. The violent episodes mentioned in his file didn't align with his current behavior or physical condition. When her shift ended, a guard escorted her to her quarters, a comfortable but sparse room on the mansion's 3rd floor. After a quick dinner from the small kitchen down the hall, she began unpacking, trying to make the space feel less sterile. A glint in the corner caught her eye. A security camera, its red light blinking steadily. Another sat near the ceiling in her bathroom. Even the small desk faced a camera's unblinking eye. Vivian changed into her nightclothes in the bathroom, feeling exposed despite the shower curtain. As she lay in bed, the weight of the day settled over her. The cameras watched silently in the darkness, their red lights like tiny stars. Sleep proved elusive as questions tumbled through her mind. Why did a supposedly violent man seem so resigned and controlled? Why did his physical symptoms not match his reported condition? And why did she need to be watched even while she slept? The mountain wind whispered against her window, and somewhere in the massive house, she heard the faint sound of footsteps passing her door. Vivian pulled her blanket tighter, wondering what kind of situation she had really walked into. Pastor Brooks's words about being placed somewhere for a purpose echoed in her memory. But right now, that purpose seemed darker and more complicated than she'd imagined. She touched her grandmother's cross and closed her eyes, but sleep remained distant. The red lights of the cameras continued their unwavering vigil, a constant reminder that in this place, someone was always watching. Vivian rose early the next morning, her mind still churning with questions from the previous day. The morning sun painted the mountain peaks in shades of pink and gold, but even that beautiful view couldn't ease her growing sense of unease. She gathered her medical supplies and headed to Damon's quarters, nodding to the ever-present guards as they unlocked the door. "Good morning, Mr. Vale," she said professionally, setting up her equipment. "Please, call me Damon." His voice was clearer today, though his movements remained sluggish from the medications. "Did you sleep well in this fortress?" Vivian noticed how his eyes darted to the cameras before meeting hers again. "I'm here to check your vitals," she said, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around his arm. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice how alert he seemed, despite the massive doses of sedatives listed in his chart. His blood pressure was normal, his reflexes quick. Too quick for someone supposedly requiring such heavy medication. His hands were steady as she drew blood for routine testing, and his responses to her questions were thoughtful and coherent. "These readings are all surprisingly stable," she murmured, making notes in his chart. "Surprising given what they claim about my condition." There was a hint of bitter humor in his voice. Before she could respond, an attendant arrived with lunch, a tray of bland hospital food and several small paper cups containing pills. Vivian watched as Damon mechanically swallowed each one under the watchful eye of a guard. When the guard stepped away to speak into his radio, Damon leaned closer to Vivian, his voice barely a whisper. "They're not treating me. They're drugging me. Don't trust anything they tell you about my condition." Vivian's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral as she continued her work. "Please extend your arm, sir," she said normally, though her mind was racing. "My family," he whispered again, even softer. "They're not what they seem." The guard returned before he could say more, and Damon fell silent, his eyes taking on that distant look she now recognized as the medications taking effect. That evening, after finishing her rounds, Vivian sat at the small desk in her room, poring over Damon's medical file. The more she read, the more inconsistencies jumped out at her. Reports from 6 months ago described violent outbursts requiring physical restraints, yet there were no incident reports documenting specific events. The progression of medication dosages showed strange patterns, increasing sharply after family visits rather than in response to symptoms. Most concerning were the psychological evaluations. The earliest ones showed no signs of delusional thinking, yet later reports painted a picture of severe mental instability. The shift was dramatic and sudden, with no clear triggering event. Needing to hear a familiar voice, Vivian reached for her phone to call her parents. She pulled up her contacts, but the screen suddenly flickered and went black. When she managed to restart it, her heart sank. Everything was gone. Her contacts, photos, even her basic apps had been wiped clean. "What in the world?" she muttered, trying unsuccessfully to recover any data. The phone worked for basic functions, but everything personal had vanished. Unable to sit still, Vivian left her room, telling herself she just needed to walk off her nervous energy. The mansion's hallways were eerily quiet at night, her footsteps muffled by thick carpeting. As she rounded a corner near the administrative offices, voices drifted through a partially open door. "Make sure everything from the January assessments is shredded," a woman's voice said. Vivian recognized it as belonging to one of the administrative staff. "Mrs. Vale wants all of Dr. Chen's original reports gone before the quarterly review." "What about the digital copies?" a male voice asked. "IT handled those last week. Just focus on the paper trail." Vivian's pulse quickened and she carefully backed away from the door. She returned to her room, her mind whirling with implications. Something was very wrong here. The medications, the inconsistent reports, the documents being destroyed. As she sat on her bed trying to make sense of it all, a slight movement of air caught her attention. It came from a vent near the floor, and something about the airflow seemed off. Following her instinct, she knelt down and peered through the slats. A tiny red light winked back at her. With trembling fingers, she carefully removed the vent cover. There, attached to the metal grating, was a small black device, clearly a listening bug. The discovery sent a chill down her spine as she realized that not only was she being watched, but every word she spoke was being monitored as well. She replaced the vent cover with shaking hands, trying to appear as though she hadn't noticed anything unusual. But her mind was racing. The cameras, the phone, the shredded documents, and now this, layer upon layer of surveillance and control. What kind of situation had she walked into? And more importantly, what were they trying so hard to hide? Vivian sat on her bed, her grandmother's cross clutched tightly in her hand. The tiny red light from the vent seemed to mock her, and somewhere in the vast mansion, she knew someone was listening to her every breath, her every movement. The walls of this gilded prison suddenly felt much closer, much more confining, and she wondered if she too was now trapped in whatever web had ensnared Damon Vale. Morning sunlight crept through Vivian's window, but it brought no warmth to chase away the chill of her discoveries from the night before. She hadn't slept much, her mind racing with thoughts of hidden listening devices and destroyed medical records. Still, she knew she had to act normal. Someone was always watching. She went through her morning routine mechanically, her hand steady even as her heart raced. When she entered Damon's wing of the mansion for his morning checkup, she found him sitting in his usual spot by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered mountains. "Good morning, Mr. Vale," she said clearly, knowing unseen ears were listening. She began laying out her medical supplies, speaking in a low, conversational tone about the weather and his scheduled activities for the day. As she checked his blood pressure, she leaned in close, pretending to adjust the cuff. "I need to understand what's happening here," she whispered, her lips barely moving. Damon's eyes met hers, sharp and clear despite the morning dose of medications. He waited until she moved to check his pulse, then spoke so quietly she almost missed it. "They want you to sign off on a psychological evaluation. Once you do, they'll use it to remove me from my company permanently." Vivian's fingers stayed steady on his wrist, counting beats while her mind processed his words. The violence they described? She murmured back. "Lies." He breathed. "All of it. I've never hurt anyone." His voice trembled slightly, and Vivian felt the slight shake in his pulse. "They've kept me drugged and isolated, building their case piece by piece. Each new nurse, each new doctor, they all sign off on what they're told to see, not what's real." Something in his tone rang true, a raw honesty that couldn't be faked. Vivian had worked with enough patience to recognize genuine distress versus manipulation. The fear in Damon's eyes wasn't that of a dangerous man, but of someone trapped and desperate to be believed. She straightened up, making a show of writing down his vital signs. "I need some time to think," she said softly. Walking back to her room, Vivian's mind was made up. She couldn't be part of whatever was happening here. She packed her small bag quickly, then headed to find Elaine Vale and tender her resignation. She found Elaine in her office, perfectly composed behind a massive mahogany desk. The older woman's smile didn't reach her eyes as Vivian explained she needed to leave for personal reasons. "My dear," Elaine said smoothly, rising from her chair, "I don't think you understand your position here." She moved to close the office door. "You signed quite extensive contracts. Breaking them would be unfortunate." "Are you threatening me, Mrs. Vale?" "Threatening? Oh, no." Elaine's laugh was like ice crackling. "I'm simply reminding you that your reputation in healthcare depends on discretion and reliability. Walking out on a high-profile patient could be career-ending." She paused, examining her manicured nails. "And of course, there's your parents to consider. How are they managing their medical bills these days?" Vivian's blood ran cold. The threat was clear: stay and comply, or watch her career and family suffer the consequences. "Take some time to reconsider," Elaine suggested, her tone almost motherly now. "You're doing such good work here." Feeling trapped and sick at heart, Vivian made her way back to Damon's wing. She had to at least tell him she was sorry, that she couldn't help. She found him alone in his room, the evening medication making him slightly drowsy but still alert. "I have to leave," she whispered, standing near his chair. "I'm so sorry, but I—" His hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Not roughly, but with desperate urgency. "Please," he whispered, his eyes boring into hers. "You were paid to watch me, but you're the only one who can set me free." The raw hope in his voice brought tears to her eyes. In that moment, she saw past the billionaire heir, past the supposed madman, to the human being trapped in a gilded cage. Someone's son, someone's friend, a person with dreams and fears and a life stolen from him. She gently extracted her wrist from his grip, patted his hand in a professionally reassuring way, and left his room without another word. But her heart had already made its decision. Back in her room, Vivian knelt beside her bed, clasping her grandmother's cross. "Lord," she whispered, knowing hidden microphones would catch her words, but needing to pray anyway. "Give me the strength to do what's right. Give me the wisdom to see the truth. And please help me help him." She knew this choice would change everything, her career, her safety, maybe even her life. But she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when she might be the only person who could help Damon reclaim his freedom and his life. The weight of her decision settled over her like a heavy blanket as she prepared for bed, going through the motions of her nightly routine while her mind raced with possibilities and fears. Tomorrow would begin a dangerous game of pretense and investigation, and she would need all her wits about her to navigate it safely. The next morning dawned crisp and clear over the Colorado mountains, but Vivian's mind was anything but settled as she prepared for her rounds. She had spent half the night creating a makeshift notebook from folded paper slipped between the lining of her scrubs, along with a small pen she could easily conceal. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote the date at the top of the first page. She found Damon already awake when she entered his room, sitting in his usual chair by the window. The morning light cast shadows under his eyes, making the exhaustion on his face more apparent. "Good morning," she said warmly, keeping her voice professional for the cameras. As she checked his blood pressure, she discreetly adjusted the medication dosage in his morning cup, reducing it just enough to help clear his mind without raising suspicion. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, making notes on his official chart while secretly documenting his true vitals in her hidden notebook when she turned away from the cameras. "Tired," Damon replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Always tired." Throughout the morning, Vivian maintained her routine while carefully observing and recording everything she could: his pupil response, coordination, mental alertness. She noted how his hands shook less as the reduced medication took effect, how his eyes seemed to focus more clearly on his surroundings. By afternoon, the change was subtle but noticeable. As she brought him lunch, Damon's posture was straighter, his movements more controlled. When she checked on him again, he spoke without the usual drug-induced slur. "I used to run a foundation," he said quietly, while she pretended to adjust his pillows. "We built schools in developing countries, funded medical research." His voice caught. "I wonder if any of that work continues now." Vivian kept her face neutral, but her heart ached at the pain in his voice. She jotted down his words in her hidden notebook later, adding them to her growing collection of observations that painted a picture very different from his family's claims. The next day, as she helped him with his morning routine, Damon seemed even more alert. "I used to pray every day," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "But after they did this, I couldn't anymore. How could God let this happen?" Vivian paused in her work, considering her words carefully. "Sometimes," she said softly, "when we're in the darkest places, that's when we need faith the most. Not because it makes things easier, but because it gives us strength to endure." Their conversations over the next 2 days grew deeper, though always careful and quiet. They spoke of resilience, of finding hope in desperate places. Vivian shared stories of her hospice patients who had found peace even in their final days, while Damon talked about the joy he'd found in helping others before his imprisonment. "The human spirit is remarkable," she told him one afternoon, while checking his vital signs. "It can bend without breaking, heal from the deepest wounds." "I'm not sure I'm that strong anymore," he admitted. "You're still here," she reminded him gently. "Still fighting. That's strength too." But even as she worked to help Damon, Vivian couldn't ignore the growing tension in the house. New security guards appeared in the hallways, their watchful eyes following her movements. The cleaning staff rotated more frequently, unfamiliar faces replacing the ones she'd grown used to. Cameras that had been static now moved to track her path through the corridors. She documented everything in her hidden notebook: staff changes, new security measures, conversations overheard. The weight of the paper against her skin became both a comfort and a concern. If anyone discovered it. On the evening of the second day, Vivian waited until the night shift changed to make her way to the kitchen. She had noticed that Martha, the elderly cook who had worked for the Vale family for 20 years, usually stayed late to prep for the next day's meals. Checking that the hallway was clear, Vivian slipped into the warm kitchen, rich with the smell of baking bread. Martha looked up from her work, her weathered face creasing in a kind smile. Miss Vivian, she said warmly, can I fix you something to eat? Actually, Vivian said carefully, moving closer to speak quietly. I was hoping to talk to you about Mr. Vale, the younger Mr. Vale. Martha's hands stilled on the dough she was kneading. She glanced at the camera in the corner of the kitchen, then deliberately moved to a blind spot behind a tall storage rack, motioning for Vivian to follow. You've noticed things aren't right here, Martha said softly. It wasn't a question. Vivian nodded. What was he like? Before? Martha's eyes grew distant with memory. Kind, she said simply. So kind. Always had time for everyone, from the gardeners to the maids. He'd sit right here sometimes, drinking coffee and asking about my grandchildren. She wiped her hands on her apron, leaving traces of flour. He was different after his father died. Worried about something. Then came the episodes they claimed he had. But I never saw any violence. Never. When did they start keeping him confined? 2 years ago. Right after he announced plans to donate half the company's profits to charity. Martha's voice dropped even lower. The next thing we knew, there were doctors saying he was unstable, dangerous. But those of us who knew him... She shook her head sadly. Before they could talk further, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Vivian quickly moved to the refrigerator, pretending to look for a snack as a security guard passed by the kitchen door. Be careful, dear, Martha whispered as Vivian prepared to leave. They're watching you closer now. They always know when someone starts asking questions. Vivian nodded, her hidden notebook feeling heavier than ever against her skin as she stepped back into the monitored hallway. Each new piece of information confirmed her suspicions, but it also increased the danger of her position. She could only pray she would find a way to help Damon before it was too late. Martha's hands trembled slightly as she reached for another bag of flour, her voice dropping even lower. When Mr. Vale Sr. was alive, this place felt different, like a real home. Damon would host charity events right here in this kitchen, cooking meals for the homeless with his own hands. She smiled at the memory. He wasn't afraid to get flour on his expensive suits. Vivian leaned against the counter, scribbling notes in her hidden notebook while appearing to write down a recipe. What changed after his father passed? Everything. Martha sighed, kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. Miss Elaine, Mrs. Vale now, she started making all these changes. First small things, like cancelling the charity events, then bigger things. She glanced nervously at the kitchen door. She convinced the board members that Damon was becoming unstable, said the stress of running the company was too much for him. Vivian noticed how the elderly cook's hands shook harder when mentioning Elaine's name. Did you ever see any signs that he was unstable? Never, Martha said firmly. That boy had his father's heart, kind and steady. The only time I saw him truly upset was when they started blocking his access to the charitable foundation he'd built. She wiped her hands on her apron, leaving floury streaks. Then came the medications, more and more of them, and suddenly we weren't allowed to speak to him anymore. As Martha spoke, Vivian's mind began connecting pieces of a disturbing puzzle. The reinforced doors, the excessive medication, the constant surveillance. It wasn't a treatment facility, it was a prison. Every aspect of the environment seemed designed to keep Damon isolated and sedated. The staff who questioned things started disappearing. Martha continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. Good jobs elsewhere, they said, but none of them ever contacted us again. Vivian felt a chill run down her spine. She needed to be smart about this. Careful. Document everything. She couldn't help Damon if she got removed from the equation too. After finishing her conversation with Martha, Vivian returned to her room and began forming a plan. She would need evidence, real, concrete proof of what was happening. Her nursing notes could help, but she needed more. Medical records, board meeting minutes, anything that could show the progression of how Damon had been systematically stripped of his freedom. She waited until well past midnight, when the night shift had settled into their usual routines. The halls were dimly lit, security cameras pivoting slowly on their mounts. Vivian had memorized their patterns over the past few days, noting the brief blind spots between sweeps. Moving silently in her soft-soled shoes, she made her way to the administrative office on the second floor. The lock was simple, just a basic keycard reader that her nurse's ID could access. Inside, the office was dark, except for the glow of computer monitors on standby mode. Vivian moved carefully between the desks, using her phone's flashlight on its lowest setting to examine labels on filing cabinets. In the back corner, she found what she was looking for, a large drawer marked Medical Records Confidential. It was locked with a separate key, more secure than the others. She was examining the lock when a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. Vivian froze, quickly switching off her light. Footsteps approached slowly, deliberately. Her heart hammering in her chest, she slipped behind a tall bookshelf just as the beam of a security flashlight swept through the office window. The footsteps paused. Vivian held her breath, pressing herself against the wall. After what felt like an eternity, the steps moved on. She waited another full minute before creeping out of her hiding spot. Using every bit of caution she'd learned working late nights in hospitals, Vivian made her way back to her room. She had just closed her door when she heard more footsteps approaching. She dove into bed, still fully dressed, and pulled the covers up just as the steps stopped outside her door. The handle rattled softly, someone testing to see if it was locked. Vivian's heart pounded so hard she was sure it must be audible. She forced her breathing to remain slow and steady, feigning sleep. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated down the hall. Vivian lay still, her mind racing. They were watching her more closely than she'd realized. She would need to be even more careful going forward. Lives depended on it. The rest of the night passed in tense alertness, each creak and distant sound making her wonder if someone would return. But no one did. As dawn began to lighten the sky outside her window, Vivian finally allowed herself to relax slightly. She hadn't found what she was looking for yet, but she would. Damon's freedom, and possibly his life, depended on it. She pulled out her notebook and added her latest observations, keeping the writing tiny and neat. Every piece of evidence would matter. Every detail could be the key to setting him free. But first, she would need to find a way back into that office, and next time, she would need to be better prepared. The storm rolled in suddenly, blanketing the Colorado mountains in thick, swirling snow. Through the mansion's tall windows, Vivian watched as white flakes piled higher and higher, transforming the manicured grounds into a winter wilderness. Security guards hustled inside, and staff hurried to secure the estate against the unexpected blizzard. "We're looking at 2 days minimum before the roads clear," announced the head of security, his walkie-talkie crackling with updates from the local weather service. "Everyone needs to stay put." Vivian's heart quickened at this news. 2 days without new staff rotations or outside interference, it was the opportunity she'd been waiting for. She headed to Damon's wing with his morning medications, carefully adjusting the doses as she had been gradually doing over the past few days. When she entered his room, Damon was standing by the window, watching the snow with an expression of wonder. "I used to love skiing," he said softly. "Before everything. The mountains are beautiful in the snow." Vivian agreed, setting down her tray. She handed him the water and pills, knowing these reduced doses would help clear more of the fog from his mind. As the day progressed, Vivian noticed the changes in Damon becoming more pronounced. His eyes grew sharper, more focused, his hands steadied. By evening, he was speaking with a clarity she hadn't heard before. "I can think again," he whispered during their evening check-in, tears welling in his eyes. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be me. His voice cracked. I'd given up hope that anyone would ever see through their lies, that anyone would care enough to help. Vivian felt her own eyes growing moist. I see you, Damon, and I believe you. They spent hours talking in hushed voices, carefully planning their next moves. Damon explained where key documents might be hidden, which staff members might be sympathetic, and most importantly, what evidence they would need to prove his illegal containment. I have something that might help, Vivian said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out what appeared to be a standard ID badge holder. It's actually a tiny camera. I ordered it before coming here, just in case. She demonstrated how it could record both video and audio while appearing completely innocent. Damon's eyes widened. You came prepared. I've learned to trust my instincts, she replied, and something felt wrong from the moment I arrived. The second day of the storm brought an unexpected development. As Vivian was serving Damon his dinner, Elaine Vale appeared in the doorway, elegant as always despite the weather. I thought I might join you both, she announced, gliding into the room. A servant hurried behind her with an extra place setting. The storm has made things so dreary, I could use some company. Vivian's hand moved instinctively to her badge holder, ensuring it was recording. She caught Damon's slight nod. He understood what was happening. Elaine settled into her chair with practiced grace. Damon, darling, how are you feeling today? Any episodes? I'm feeling quite well, thank you, Damon replied calmly. His voice was steady, his posture relaxed, but alert. Elaine's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. And have you been thinking about the company lately? All those responsibilities you found so overwhelming. Vivian watched the exchange intently, noting how Elaine's questions were carefully crafted to probe for signs of the instability she claimed Damon suffered from. I think about the company often, Damon answered, particularly our charitable initiatives. The children's hospital wing we were planning would have helped so many families. His voice was clear and rational, his logic sound. A flicker of something. Surprise? Concern? Crossed Elaine's face before her smooth mask returned. Yes, well, we all know how those plans affected you. The stress was simply too much. Was it? Damon met her gaze steadily. I recall being quite energized by the project, actually. The board was fully supportive. The funding was secured. It's interesting how things changed so suddenly after Father's death. Elaine's knife scraped sharply against her plate. Perhaps we should change the subject. These memories seem to agitate you. Not at all, Damon replied mildly. I'm quite comfortable discussing any aspect of the business. Would you like to review the quarterly projections? I've had plenty of time to think about our market position. Vivian kept her expression neutral, but inside she was cheering. Damon was demonstrating not only his sanity, but his continued business acumen, and her camera was capturing every moment. The rest of the dinner passed in tense conversation, with Elaine's attempts to lead Damon into confused or angry responses consistently failing. Finally, she stood, smoothing her silk blouse. Well, this has been illuminating. Good evening. After she left, Damon let out a long breath. He turned to Vivian with a small, grateful smile that spoke volumes. In that moment, she saw both his strength and his vulnerability, a man fighting to reclaim his life from those who had stolen it. Later that night, safely in her room, Vivian reviewed the footage on her laptop. The video was crystal clear, showing Elaine's subtle manipulations and Damon's composed, rational responses. Combined with her documentation of the medication changes and their effects, it painted a compelling picture of a man being deliberately suppressed, not treated. The camera had captured everything: the leading questions, the attempt to provoke an emotional response, and most importantly, Damon's complete lucidity. It was powerful evidence, and it was only the beginning. As the snow continued to fall outside her window, Vivian felt a surge of hope. They were finally fighting back. The morning sun finally broke through the heavy clouds, melting away the last traces of snow that had blanketed the estate. Vivian watched from the window as workers began returning, their cars carefully navigating the still slick driveway. The isolation of the past 2 days was ending, bringing with it a new sense of urgency. As she made her way down the hallway with fresh linens, voices drifted from around the corner. She recognized the low rumble of Marcus and John, 2 of the security guards who usually worked the perimeter. "Direct orders from Mrs. Vale," Marcus was saying. "The nurse doesn't leave our sight when she's outside her room or Vale's quarters." "Yeah, something's got them spooked," John replied. "Did you see how he was acting at dinner last night? Way too clear-headed?" Vivian's heart quickened, but she kept her steps steady, turning down a different corridor before they could spot her. They were watching her more closely now, which meant time was running out. Later that afternoon, as she checked Damon's vital signs, she noticed him staring intently at the old photograph of his father on the wall. There was something different in his expression, a spark of recognition. "What is it?" she asked softly, making sure to position herself away from the room's cameras. "I just remembered something," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Father's study. There's a safe behind the bookshelf. I used to watch him access it when I was younger." His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. The original medical records, legal documents, he kept everything important in there. Vivian's pulse quickened. "Do you know how to open it?" "I think so. He used the same code for everything. My birthday and mother's death date combined." Damon's eyes met hers. "But we'd need a distraction to get in there. The study is off limits now." She thought quickly, years of emergency room experience kicking in. "I could create a medical situation, something urgent enough to draw attention, but not serious enough to require outside help." They spent the next hour carefully planning. Vivian prepared a harmless but impressive-looking setup involving her medical equipment, while Damon memorized the exact location of the safe from his childhood memories. When everything was ready, Vivian burst out of Damon's room, calling urgently for help. "He's having an adverse reaction to the new medication combination. I need assistance." The guards rushed forward as she described symptoms that sounded alarming but weren't life-threatening. In the confusion, she accidentally knocked over her medical cart, scattering supplies across the floor. As staff scrambled to help clean up, she nodded imperceptibly to Damon, who slipped away while everyone was distracted. Vivian kept the charade going for several minutes, then announced that the situation was stabilizing. "False alarm. Looks like just a temporary reaction. I'll need to monitor him closely for the next hour, though." She made her way to the study, her heart pounding beneath her calm exterior. The room was exactly as Damon had described: dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and a massive desk that dominated the space. He was already there, running his fingers along the edge of a particular bookshelf. "Here," he whispered, pressing a hidden catch. A panel clicked softly, revealing the safe embedded in the wall. Vivian stood watch as Damon's fingers moved over the keypad. For a moment, nothing happened. Then there was a soft beep, and the safe door swung open. Inside, neatly organized folders filled the space. Damon's hands shook as he pulled them out. Original medical evaluations from before his father's death showed no signs of mental illness. Legal documents detailed the transfer of power that had occurred while he was heavily sedated. Everything they needed was there, proof of the elaborate deception that had stripped him of his freedom. Vivian quickly photographed each page with her phone, making sure every detail was clear. The evidence was devastating, a paper trail of manipulation and fraud that had imprisoned an innocent man. Just as she finished the last photo, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Vivian's heart leapt into her throat as she helped Damon rapidly return the documents to the safe. The panel clicked shut just as the footsteps drew closer. The truth was finally documented, but someone was about to discover them where they weren't supposed to be. The golden light of sunset filled Vivian's room as she methodically packed her few belongings. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, born from years of hospital work where every second counted. She tucked the USB drives, 3 identical copies of their evidence, into specially sewn pockets in her uniform. The familiar weight of her cross necklace pressed against her chest as she bent to double-check her preparations. Down the hall, she could hear Damon's measured footsteps as he too prepared for their escape. They had agreed to wait until dawn, the quietest hour, when the night shift grew drowsy and the day staff hadn't yet arrived. Everything had to appear normal until then. "Lord, give us strength," she whispered, running through their plan one more time in her mind. The evidence was overwhelming: medical records proving Damon's sanity, financial documents showing how Elaine had systematically stripped him of control, and Vivian's own detailed observations of the forced medication regime. A soft knock at her door made her freeze, but it was just Damon, his face pale but determined in the fading light. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. "Almost?" Vivian carefully arranged her medical supplies as if preparing for another routine day. "I've hidden copies of everything in different places. Even if they find one, the others should make it out." Damon's hands trembled slightly as he helped her organize the last few items. "I can't thank you enough, Vivian. Whatever happens." His voice caught. "You've already given me back my dignity." "We're not done yet," she reminded him gently. "Try to rest. Tomorrow morning we'll need our strength." The night crawled by with agonizing slowness. Vivian lay fully dressed on her bed, watching shadows move across the ceiling. Every creak of the old mansion made her heart jump. She thought of her parents, probably worried sick about her lack of contact. Soon, she promised silently. Soon this would all be over. At 5:30 in the morning, Vivian rose and began her normal routine. She checked her hidden camera, ensuring it was recording. The early morning silence felt thick with tension as she walked to Damon's room for his morning medication. He was ready, sitting calmly in his chair as if this were any other day. They had agreed, no suspicious behavior, nothing to alert the cameras. She went through the motions of checking his vitals, their practiced dance of deception one last time. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to paint the mountains gold when it happened. A harsh electronic wail cut through the morning quiet, the estate's security alarm. Vivian's blood ran cold as heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. Before either of them could move, the door burst open. Guards poured in, their faces grim. 2 grabbed Vivian's arms, pulling them roughly behind her back. Others surrounded Damon, who struggled briefly before being overwhelmed. "No!" Vivian shouted as they dragged him away. "He's not dangerous! You're hurting him!" Now. A smooth voice cut through the chaos. "There's no need for shouting." Elaine Vale stood in the doorway, immaculately dressed in a pearl grey suit. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor as she approached Vivian. "Did you really think we wouldn't be watching? Your little investigation was so predictable." Vivian fought to keep her voice steady. "You can't keep doing this to him. He's not sick. You're the one who's been—" "Take her to the basement," Elaine interrupted, examining her manicured nails. "We need to have a private conversation about her future." The guards marched Vivian through the mansion's winding corridors and down a flight of concrete stairs she hadn't known existed. The basement was cold and stark, with bright fluorescent lights that hurt her eyes after the dim stairwell. They pushed her into a metal chair, securing her wrists with zip ties. Elaine's heels echoed on the concrete as she descended the stairs. She carried a leather portfolio, her expression pleasant but her eyes hard as steel. "You know," she said conversationally, "I had such hopes for you, Vivian. Your references were impeccable. Your work history spotless." She sighed. "Such a waste. Where's Damon?" Vivian demanded. "What have you done with him?" "He's being taken care of." Elaine opened the portfolio and removed a single document. "Now, we have a simple choice to make." She placed the paper in front of Vivian. It was a formal psychological evaluation, already filled out. Only a signature line at the bottom remained empty. "Sign this declaration of Damon's mental incompetency," Elaine said softly, "or you and Damon disappear tonight. No one will ever find you. Just 2 more tragic accidents in these dangerous mountains." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Vivian stared at the document that could seal both their fates. In the harsh basement light, Vivian stared at the incompetency form, her hands shaking but her heart growing steadier with each breath. She thought of Damon's clear eyes, his quiet dignity despite years of abuse. With careful deliberation, she lifted her gaze to meet Elaine's cold stare. "No," Vivian said softly. "I won't sign it." The word hung in the air between them. Elaine's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment, revealing something darker underneath. She leaned forward, her manicured fingers splaying across the metal table. "You don't seem to understand your situation," Elaine said, her voice dropping to a silky whisper. "This isn't a negotiation. The Vale family has dealt with obstacles before. People who asked too many questions, who thought they could interfere with our business." She straightened, smoothing her pearl-grey suit. "They simply disappeared. Tragic accidents in these treacherous mountains. No one ever found them." Vivian's throat went dry, but she kept her voice steady. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm educating you." Elaine nodded to one of the guards. "Perhaps some time alone will help you think more clearly about your options." The fluorescent lights clicked off with a sharp snap. Footsteps echoed on concrete, then a heavy door slammed. Darkness pressed against Vivian's eyes, so complete she couldn't see her own hands bound in front of her. Hours crept by in the pitch black. The cold seeped through Vivian's scrubs, making her shiver. Her wrists ached from the zip ties. In the darkness, doubt and fear began to crowd her mind. What if they'd already hurt Damon? What about her parents? Would they ever know what happened to her? But as the darkness stretched on, other memories began to surface. She remembered sitting in her grandmother's lap as a child, listening to Bible stories about courage and faith. Her grandmother's warm voice seemed to fill the darkness. "Baby girl, sometimes God puts us exactly where we need to be to help others. Even when we're scared, He gives us the strength we need." Vivian closed her eyes, though it made no difference in the blackness. "Lord," she whispered, "I'm so afraid, but I know you didn't bring me here by accident. Please give me strength, help me protect Damon, show me what to do." The prayer steadied her. She thought of her parents, how they'd taught her that doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. Their struggles with medical bills, their unwavering integrity despite hardship, had shaped her entire life. More memories surfaced, Damon's face lighting up when she treated him with simple kindness. The way his hands had trembled when he first told her the truth. The evidence they'd gathered, proof of years of systematic abuse and manipulation. If she gave in now, signed that paper, she would be helping them destroy an innocent man. "No," she whispered in the darkness. "I won't do it." When the lights finally blazed back on, Vivian had to squeeze her eyes shut against the sudden glare, but her resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. As her vision adjusted, she saw Elaine entering the room, flanked by guards. "Have you reconsidered?" Elaine asked, sliding the form forward again. Vivian met her gaze steadily. "I will not sign that paper. Not now, not ever. What you're doing to Damon is wrong, and I won't help you hurt him anymore." Elaine's perfectly painted lips tightened. For a long moment, she studied Vivian's face. Then she turned to the guards with a small, cruel smile. "Prepare the sedation," she ordered. "Make sure it looks like an unfortunate accident. Poor thing just couldn't handle the stress of her new position." She glanced back at Vivian. Such a shame when healthcare workers turn to substance abuse, but it happens all too often, doesn't it? The guards nodded grimly and began moving forward. Vivian's heart pounded against her ribs, but she kept her head high, silently praying for strength as they approached with purpose in their steps. Vivian held her breath as the guards' footsteps faded down the hallway. Her heart was hammering so hard she could barely think straight, but she forced herself to focus. The weight of her ID badge against her chest suddenly felt significant. The body cam was still there, still recording. A tiny spark of hope flickered in her chest. "Just get the supplies," she heard one guard say. "Vale wants this done quick and clean." As their voices grew distant, Vivian tested her restraints. The zip ties bit into her wrists, but the rope around her torso had some give. She glanced around the basement room, scanning for anything that might help. In the harsh fluorescent light, she spotted a metal shelf with a sharp corner jutting out about 3 feet away. Taking a deep breath, Vivian tensed her muscles. With all her strength, she rocked the chair sideways. The first attempt barely moved it. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she tried again, throwing her weight harder. This time, the chair tipped precariously. "Lord help me," she whispered, and gave one final push. The chair crashed onto its side with a loud clatter. Pain shot through Vivian's shoulder as she hit the concrete floor, but she barely noticed. Awkwardly positioned, she began working her bound hands towards the shelf's sharp edge. The angle was terrible, and every movement sent shooting pains through her arms, but she persisted. Back and forth, she sawed the rope against the metal corner. Her wrists were raw and burning, but she could feel the fibers starting to fray. Just a little more. The rope suddenly gave way. Vivian's arms came free so suddenly she almost cried out in relief. Quickly she worked at the zip ties with trembling fingers, managing to loosen them enough to slip one hand free. Her wrists were bruised and bleeding slightly, but she was mobile. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. The guards were returning. Vivian scrambled to her feet, ignoring the protest of her battered muscles. She looked frantically around the dim basement, spotting a heavy storage cabinet near the door. Without hesitation, she squeezed behind it, making herself as small as possible. The door swung open with a creak. "What the hell?" One guard's voice was sharp with surprise. "Check the room," another ordered. "She can't have gone far." Vivian pressed herself flat against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. She could hear them moving around, boots scuffing on, concrete as they investigated the overturned chair. "The rope's been cut," one reported. "She must have found something sharp. Spread out, search every corner." Vivian's heart nearly stopped as footsteps approached her hiding spot. But the guard turned away at the last moment, drawn to a noise from the other side of the room. Taking advantage of their distraction, she eased out from behind the cabinet. The door stood open, spilling yellow light from the hallway. Moving as silently as she could, Vivian crept toward it. She paused at the threshold, waiting until both guards had their backs turned, then slipped into the corridor. Her legs were shaking as she moved down the hallway, staying close to the wall. Every shadow made her jump. Every distant sound froze her in place. But somehow, she made it to the stairs without being spotted. The main floor was eerily quiet. Vivian knew she needed to find a computer, something connected to the internet. Her mind raced back to her first day at the estate, trying to remember where she'd seen offices. There had been one near the front entrance, she was almost certain. Keeping low, she made her way through the mansion's elegant corridors. Everything looked different in the emergency lighting, casting strange shadows across expensive artwork and antique furniture. Finally, she spotted what she was looking for, a small study with a desktop computer. Vivian's hands were trembling so badly she could hardly work the mouse. The computer prompted for a password, making her heart sink. Then she remembered something Damon had told her about his stepmother, how Elaine always used the same password, his father's birthday. "Please work," Vivian whispered, typing in the date, 031958. The screen unlocked. Working as quickly as she could, Vivian removed her badge and plugged the tiny USB connection into the computer. She'd never been more grateful for the church's technology ministry, which had helped her set up secure cloud storage linked to a journalist contact. The same contact she'd reached through their emergency hotline when she first suspected something was wrong at the estate. Files began copying to the drive. Hours of footage showing Elaine's threats, the forced medications, everything. Vivian's fingers flew across the keyboard, uploading it all to the secure server. A progress bar appeared on screen. 10%, 25%, 50%. The sound of boots on marble made her blood run cold. They were coming, multiple sets of feet, moving fast and purposeful. Vivian's eyes stayed locked on the screen, silently willing it to move faster. 75%. The footsteps were getting closer. She could hear voices now, sharp commands being issued. 90%. They were in the hallway. Any second now, they would reach the study. 95%. The upload completed. Vivian's finger stabbed down on the mouse, clicking "Send," just as the first shadow appeared in the doorway. Heavy boots pounded towards the study, and Vivian knew her time had run out. The evidence was sent. Whatever happened next, the truth would finally come to light. The heavy footsteps grew closer, and Vivian's survival instincts kicked in. She darted away from the computer, scanning desperately for an escape route. A storage room caught her eye, its door slightly ajar, promising shelter among the shadows. Without hesitation, she slipped inside, easing the door nearly closed behind her. The room was cluttered with cleaning supplies and old office equipment. Vivian crouched behind a stack of printer paper boxes, making herself as small as possible. Her heart thundered so loudly she worried they might hear it through the walls. "Check every room," a voice commanded from the hallway. "She has to be on this floor." Boots stomped past her hiding place. Flashlight beams swept under the door, making Vivian hold her breath. She could hear them methodically searching nearby rooms, growing closer with each passing moment. "Sir, movement detected at the front gate." The sudden shout made her jump. A radio crackled. "Multiple vehicles approaching. Looks like law enforcement." Vivian's eyes widened. The journalist must have acted immediately upon receiving the footage. She sent up a silent prayer of thanksgiving, hardly daring to hope that help had arrived so quickly. The peaceful morning air suddenly split with the piercing wail of sirens. Many sirens, growing louder by the second. The sound was the most beautiful thing Vivian had ever heard. "State police! Everyone on the ground!" The command boomed through megaphones outside. Chaos erupted in the hallways. Guards were shouting, running, their footsteps thundering in all directions. Vivian knew this was her chance. She burst from her hiding place, adrenaline giving her renewed strength as she ran toward the back entrance she'd noticed during her first week at the estate. "Help!" she screamed as she emerged into the crisp morning air. "Over here! Please help!" 2 officers spotted her immediately, weapons drawn as they approached. "Ma'am, are you Vivian Kane?" "Yes." She was trembling so hard she could barely speak. Please, you have to help Damon. They've been drugging him. He needs medical attention right away. More officers were swarming the property now, some leading handcuffed guards while others secured the perimeter. Vivian saw Elaine being escorted out in handcuffs, her usual composure finally cracking as she demanded to speak with her lawyer. "Can you show us where Damon Vale is being held?" one officer asked Vivian. She nodded, already moving. "Follow me. Hurry, please." They raced through the mansion's winding corridors, Vivian leading the way to Damon's quarters. Her heart clenched when she saw him through the reinforced glass. He was slumped in a chair, barely conscious, clearly having been heavily sedated when the alarm first sounded. "He's in here," she called to the officers. "The door code is 27843. The lock clicked open, and they rushed to Damon's side. His eyes fluttered as he tried to focus on them. "Vivian," he mumbled. "I'm here," she assured him, grabbing his hand while officers checked his vital signs. "You're safe now. It's over." Paramedics arrived with a stretcher, carefully lifting Damon's limp form. The full weight of everything that had happened suddenly crashed over Vivian. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if an officer hadn't caught her arm. "Easy there," he said kindly. "Let's get you checked out too." Vivian nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for keeping us safe." The morning sun was bright and beautiful as they wheeled her out to a waiting ambulance. They lifted her stretcher in beside Damon's, and a paramedic immediately began checking her injuries. "Your friend here is going to be fine," the medic assured her, noting her worried glance at Damon. "The sedatives will wear off soon, and there appears to be no permanent damage. You both need rest, but you're going to be okay." Vivian reached over and squeezed Damon's hand one more time as the ambulance doors closed. His fingers twitched slightly in response, weak but alive, finally free. The vehicle began moving, sirens clearing a path toward the hospital and away from the nightmare they'd endured. Sunlight streamed through hospital curtains, casting warm patterns across Vivian's face as consciousness slowly returned. Her eyelids felt heavy, and there was a dull ache in her wrists where the ropes had cut into them. For a moment, panic gripped her. Was she still at the estate? Then she heard a familiar voice that made her heart leap. "Baby girl, we're right here." Vivian's eyes flew open to see her mother, Lillian, leaning over the bed with tears in her eyes. Her father, James, stood just behind, his normally stoic face etched with worry and relief. "Mama? Daddy?" Vivian's voice cracked as she tried to sit up. "How did you—" "The victim support services flew us out here as soon as they could reach us," her mother explained, gently helping Vivian adjust her pillows. "We've been so worried, sweetheart, when we couldn't reach you for days. I'm sorry," Vivian whispered, tears welling up. "They took my phone, blocked all communication. I couldn't—" "Shh, none of that now," her father said, his strong hand squeezing her shoulder. "You're safe. That's all that matters." A gentle knock at the door interrupted their reunion. A woman in a dark suit entered, her badge identifying her as Detective Sarah Martinez. "Miss Kane, I'm glad to see you're awake," the detective said warmly. "How are you feeling?" Vivian shifted carefully, taking stock of her injuries. "Sore, but okay. How is Damon?" Detective Martinez pulled up a chair. "Mr. Vale is in the intensive care unit, but he's stable and showing improvement. The doctors are carefully managing his withdrawal from the forced medications. They expect him to make a full recovery." Relief flooded through Vivian. "And the estate? Elaine?" "The entire property is under full investigation," the detective explained, opening her notebook. "Your body cam footage provided crucial evidence. We've already uncovered extensive financial records showing years of fraud and conspiracy. Mrs. Vale and several key staff members are in custody." Vivian's mother gripped her hand. You were so brave, baby, but you could have been killed. I had to help him, Mama, Vivian said softly. They were destroying his life, his spirit. No one deserved that. The detective nodded approvingly. Your actions saved not just Mr. Vale, but potentially others. We're finding evidence this wasn't their first attempt at gaining control of assets through medical manipulation. They spent the next hour going over preliminary statements, with Detective Martinez promising to return later for a full deposition. After she left, Vivian's parents helped her eat some lunch and shared updates from home. Her father had brought her favorite Bible, and they spent time reading passages together, finding comfort in familiar verses about justice and deliverance. Late in the afternoon, a nurse appeared. Miss Kane, Mr. Vale is asking to see you. If you feel up to it, we can wheel you to his room. Vivian nodded immediately. Yes, please. Her parents helped her into a wheelchair, and the nurse guided them down several corridors to the ICU. Vivian's heart tightened as they approached Damon's room. Despite the detective's assurances, she needed to see for herself that he was truly okay. The room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. Damon lay propped up slightly, looking pale but alert. When he saw Vivian, a smile transformed his tired face. My guardian angel, he said softly. Vivian's parents stayed tactfully by the door as the nurse wheeled her closer to his bed. Damon reached out his hand, and Vivian took it, feeling how much stronger his grip was already. Thank you, he whispered, his eyes bright with unshed tears. You saved my life, not just from their plans but from the despair. You saw the truth when no one else would look. I just did what was right, Vivian said, her own eyes filling. I couldn't leave you there. The detective tells me they have enough evidence now to prosecute everyone involved. Damon continued. Years of records, witness statements, the footage you captured. They won't be able to hurt anyone else. Vivian squeezed his hand. I'll testify to everything I saw, whatever they need, however long it takes. I know you will. Damon's smile was tired but genuine. You've already proven yourself the most loyal ally I could have hoped for. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Just focus on getting better, Vivian told him. That's all the thanks I need. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both aware of how far they'd come, from those first wary meetings through the reinforced glass door. Finally, Damon spoke again, his voice stronger. I promise you this. I'll make sure justice is done. Not just for me, but for anyone else they may have targeted. And when I'm back on my feet, I'm going to rebuild my father's charitable foundation. Do real good again, like I used to. I believe you will, Vivian said. And I'll be there to support you every step of the way until this is finished. The nurse quietly reminded them that both patients needed rest. As her parents began wheeling her back to her room, Vivian looked over her shoulder one last time. Damon raised his hand in a small wave, and she could see in his eyes the same determination she felt, to see this through until truth and justice prevailed. Spring brought new life to Atlanta, and with it came profound changes in Vivian Kane's world. The trial of Elaine Vale and her conspirators had dominated headlines for weeks, but justice prevailed. Now, 6 months after those harrowing days in Colorado, Vivian sat in her parents' newly renovated kitchen, sipping coffee and marveling at how God worked in mysterious ways. I still can't believe all these blessings, her mother said, running her hand along the smooth new countertop. The house had been completely updated thanks to the community fund created in Vivian's honor. Local churches, inspired by her courage, had rallied together to help erase her family's medical debts. The Lord provides, her father added, his voice strong and clear. His health had improved significantly now that he could afford proper treatment. "Through you, baby girl." Vivian smiled, remembering the flood of support that had poured in after the story broke. Letters arrived daily from people touched by her stand against elder abuse. But the biggest change waited in her email inbox. An offer from Damon Vale that would allow her to help others on an even greater scale. The phone rang, and Vivian recognized the number. "Good morning, Damon." She answered warmly. "Everything's ready for next week's launch," he said, his voice carrying none of the tension she remembered from their first meetings. "The Foundation's paperwork is complete. All we need now is our director to make it official." Vivian felt a flutter of excitement. The Vale Foundation for Elder Protection and Medical Justice. She still couldn't believe Damon had asked her to lead it. "I'll be there," she promised. "My flight's booked for Tuesday." "The estate looks different now," Damon told her. "You'll hardly recognize it." After disconnecting, Vivian shared the updates with her parents. Her mother wiped happy tears from her eyes. Look how God turned something meant for evil into such good. The following Tuesday, Vivian stepped off the private plane in Colorado, breathing in the crisp mountain air. This time, there were no armed guards or security cameras, just Damon himself, waiting with a warm smile. "Welcome back," he said, helping her with her bag. Though under much better circumstances. The drive to the estate gave them time to catch up. Damon had thrown himself into rebuilding his father's legacy, using his restored position to advocate for stronger protections against medical exploitation. His eyes lit up as he described the Foundation's mission. "We've already identified 3 cases similar to mine," he explained. "People whose families tried to seize control through false diagnoses. The Foundation will provide legal support, investigation services, and safe housing for victims. And rehabilitation support." Vivian added, "Help them recover from forced medication, rebuild their lives." "Exactly." Damon glanced at her. "That's why I need you running this. You understand both the medical and human aspects. Plus, you have something I lost for a while. Faith." They turned up the familiar mountain road, but everything else had changed. The imposing gates were gone, replaced by a welcoming entrance with a simple sign. Vale Retreat Center for Healing and Hope. Gardens bloomed where security stations once stood. "Oh, Damon," Vivian breathed as they parked. "It's beautiful." He led her through the transformed grounds. "We've converted the entire East Wing into counseling offices and support group spaces. The West Wing will be temporary housing for people escaping situations like mine. And the main house." He paused at the front door. "Well, see for yourself." Vivian stepped inside, amazed. Gone were the sterile corridors and surveillance equipment. Warm colors, comfortable furniture, and inspiring artwork filled the spaces. Natural light streamed through previously shuttered windows. "The basement where they held you is now a meditation room," Damon said quietly. "We had it blessed by several faith leaders, turning darkness into light." They walked through peaceful hallways where Vivian had once crept in fear. The room that had been Damon's prison was now a sunny library. Even the staff quarters where she'd discovered listening devices had been transformed into bright visitor suites. In the garden behind the house, they paused on a bench overlooking the mountains. Prayer flags fluttered in the breeze, a gift from a Buddhist temple that had helped with the renovation. "I've been thinking a lot about redemption," Damon said. "Not just personal healing, but redeeming this place itself. Making it a sanctuary instead of a prison." Vivian nodded. "That's what true redemption does. Transforms everything it touches. Like in Isaiah, beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning." "You taught me to hope again," Damon said softly. "When you looked at me and saw truth instead of delusion, it rekindled something I thought was dead. faith in goodness, in God's presence, even in darkness. He was there, Vivian agreed, working through both of us. They continued walking the grounds as afternoon light gilded the mountains. Damon pointed out future projects: a healing garden, an art therapy studio, spaces for people to rediscover themselves after trauma. The Foundation's official launch is tomorrow, he said, but I wanted you to see this first, to understand what your courage made possible. Vivian felt tears in her eyes as she took it all in: the peaceful grounds, the transformed buildings, the sense of hope and healing that now permeated every corner. It's more than I ever imagined. Would you like to see inside the renovated main house? Damon asked. We've turned it into a retreat center, a place where people can rest and recover. Vivian smiled, ready to witness one final transformation. Lead the way. The sun was setting behind the mountains as they climbed the steps, painting the sky in colors of renewal. Where darkness had once reigned, light now flowed freely. Where fear had gripped hearts, hope now took root and flourished. Together they walked toward the open doors, ready to help others find their way from shadow into healing. Stepping into the main house, Vivian gasped. The transformation was complete. Sunlight poured through tall windows that had once been covered, dancing across polished hardwood floors. Gentle music drifted from somewhere deeper in the building, and the air smelled of fresh flowers and herbs. We wanted to make it feel like home, Damon explained, leading her through the entrance hall. A place where healing doesn't feel clinical. The old security station had become a welcoming desk staffed by a warm-faced woman who waved as they passed. Where metal detectors once stood, there were now comfortable seating areas with soft cushions and calming artwork. Most of our staff are former healthcare workers or counselors, Damon said. People who understand trauma and recovery. Some are even survivors themselves. They passed a group therapy room where chairs were arranged in a circle, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the mountains. In the kitchen, once strictly off-limits to Damon, a nutritionist was teaching cooking classes to residents. Remember how they used to bring my meals on plastic trays? Damon smiled sadly. Now everyone eats together in the dining room. Community healing is just as important as individual care. Vivian noticed small touches everywhere that spoke of thoughtful care, inspiration quotes painted on walls, cozy reading nooks tucked into corners, and artwork created by previous residents. Even the medication room, necessary for those in recovery, felt peaceful rather than threatening. The staff here actually listen to patients, Damon explained. They work with them to create individual healing plans. No forced treatments, no isolation. They paused by a window overlooking the garden, where several residents were tending to flower beds or sitting quietly on benches. The sight brought tears to Vivian's eyes as she remembered the barren grounds where Damon had never been allowed to walk. Sometimes I can hardly believe it's the same place, she whispered. It isn't, Damon replied softly. You were paid to watch over me, but God sent you to set me free. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Vivian felt tears slip down her cheeks as she turned to face him. And he set me free too, just in a different way, she said. I was so focused on my family's debts, on just getting by, but God had bigger plans. He showed me my true purpose. Through the window, they could see a van arriving with new guests for the healing programs. Staff members hurried out to greet them, offering gentle smiles and helping hands. The hope in the newcomer's eyes was unmistakable, the same hope Vivian had seen in Damon's eyes when she first truly saw him. Each person who comes here has a story, Damon said. Like mine, like yours. stories of being trapped, controlled, or misunderstood, but they also have the chance to write a new ending. They watched as the new arrivals were welcomed inside, their tense shoulders already beginning to relax in the peaceful atmosphere. Vivian thought about her own journey, from a struggling nurse trying to support her parents to the director of a foundation that would help countless others. "My parents still can't believe how everything turned out," she said with a smile. "Daddy says God works in mysterious ways, but Mama just calls it a miracle." "It is a miracle," Damon agreed. "One that started with your courage to see the truth." They made their way to the back patio, where the late afternoon sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Prayer flags fluttered in the breeze, their gentle movement a reminder of the constant flow of healing energy through this transformed space. Vivian closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warm sun on her face. She offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey she never expected, for the lives that would be changed in this place, and for the divine guidance that had led her exactly where she needed to be. When she opened her eyes, she saw more guests arriving, their faces filled with cautious hope. Some were accompanied by family members, others came alone, but all were met with the same compassionate welcome that had been so absent when this was the Vale estate. "Look at them," Damon said softly. "Every person who finds healing here is a victory over what this place used to be. Every smile, every moment of peace, it helps redeem the darkness that happened here." Vivian nodded, watching as a young woman hesitantly accepted help with her bags, her eyes brightening at the staff's genuine kindness. This was why God had led her here, she realized. Not just to save one man, but to help create a sanctuary where countless others could find their way back to light and hope. The mountains stood strong and eternal before them, their peaks catching the last rays of sunlight. Vivian thought about all the nights she had lain awake in this place, terrified and uncertain. Now those same rooms would shelter others on their journey to healing. She silently thanked God for leading her into this unexpected journey, one that had changed not only her life, but would continue to transform countless others. In saving Damon, she had found her true calling. In facing her fears, she had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. And in following God's guidance, even when the path seemed dark and dangerous, she had helped create a place where light would always overcome darkness. The gentle breeze carried the sound of laughter from somewhere in the gardens, proof that joy could bloom even in places where sorrow once ruled. Vivian smiled, grateful to be part of this ongoing story of redemption and hope. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the renovated estate as Vivian and Damon made their way back inside. The great room, once a symbol of oppression, now radiated warmth with its earth-toned walls and comfortable furnishings. Volunteers bustled about, preparing for the afternoon's press gathering that would officially launch the foundation. "The setup looks perfect," Vivian said, watching as fresh flowers were arranged on tables that had been positioned throughout the space. Her clipboard held the afternoon's schedule, though she'd memorized every detail already. Damon nodded, his eyes scanning the room with quiet satisfaction. "It's important we get this right. Each person who shares their story today is helping break the silence around medical exploitation." They settled at a wooden table near the stone fireplace to review the event notes one final time. Vivian couldn't help but remember how different this room had felt months ago. Cold, sterile, threatening. Now it felt like a sanctuary. "The support groups will start meeting here next week," Damon said, gesturing to the circle of chairs being arranged in the corner. "Real healing happens when people know they're not alone." Vivian's phone buzzed in her pocket. The name on the screen made her breath catch. Sarah Martinez, the journalist whose quick action had helped bring the police that fateful night. I should take this, she said, standing up. It's the reporter who helped us. Damon touched her arm gently. Tell her everything. Your story needs to be heard. Vivian stepped out onto the terrace where the mountain air carried the scent of pine and new beginnings. The peaks stood majestic against the clear blue sky, so different from the threatening shadows they'd cast during her imprisonment. Miss Martinez? She answered, her voice steady and sure. Yes, I have a few minutes to talk. The journalist's questions were thoughtful, probing not just the facts, but the heart of what had happened. Vivian found herself speaking openly about the night she'd chosen to believe in Damon's desperate plea for help. I could have walked away, she admitted, watching an eagle soar between the mountains. The money was tempting, and the threats were real. But there are moments when God places a choice in front of you, to look away or to stand firm in what's right. She shared about her grandmother's teachings on courage, about the prayers that had sustained her in the basement darkness, about the strength she'd found in her faith when everything seemed hopeless. The foundation isn't just about preventing abuse, she explained. It's about showing people there's always hope, always a way forward, even in the darkest situations. When the interview concluded, Vivian took a moment to breathe in the crisp mountain air before heading back inside. The great room had transformed further in her absence, with staff arranging chairs in neat rows for the afternoon ceremony. Damon stood by the fireplace, his tall frame silhouetted against the stone. In his hands, he held 2 wooden plaques, their surfaces gleaming in the natural light. I wanted you to see these before everyone else arrives, he said as she approached. His voice held a gentle reverence that made her pause. The first plaque bore her name in elegant script. The Vivian Kane Center for Healing and Hope. The second, causing tears to well in her eyes, was dedicated to her grandmother. In honor of Sarah May Wilson, her faith lights the way. The First Therapy building will carry these. Damon explained softly. Your courage and your grandmother's wisdom deserve to be remembered. Vivian's hand trembled as she reached out, placing it over Damon's where he held the plaques. The wood was warm beneath their touching fingers, like the courage and faith that had brought them to this moment. Around them, staff members continued their preparations, setting up the last rows of chairs, adjusting flowers and testing microphones. The afternoon sun cast long rectangles of light across the hardwood floors, transforming dust motes into floating gold. Words felt inadequate, but Vivian managed to whisper, "Thank you," her voice thick with emotion. She understood that this wasn't just about honoring her or her grandmother. It was about marking the beginning of something profound, a mission of healing that would touch countless lives. They stood together by the fireplace, watching the room come alive with purpose, ready to face this new chapter of healing, not as captive and nurse, but as partners in hope. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.